From the shores of Elmina to Cape coastlines, every pop tells a story, every dream takes flight. Through the forests of Kakum, where the eagles soar, Raphlink Root Tours opens every door. Hear the drums calling, feel the heartbeat strong. This is where our history has belonged. Every journey brings the past along. In the land where spirits
So where are we going? This way, right?
At the main courtyard, about 600 men were shared in the dungeons. The back here is the female courtyard. All the rooms we see here were the dungeons for the female enslaved Africans. And about 400 women were shared in these dungeons, making out the scene. This is a reservoir. It contains drinking water, and about 20,000 gallons of water can be in this. When the Portuguese were building this castle, they made this for domestic use. But when the Dutch took over, the Dutch were afraid that the Portuguese might have poisoned them. So they never used this and made their reservoir at a different place. The coastal line of West Africa was also termed as the white man's grave. When the Europeans came here, most of them were dying from malaria. So they didn't bring their wives here and took advantage of the women's. They were raping the females. Because of the governor's position, they would always be out there. That was the balcony for the governor, and instruct the soldiers to bring out the females here. He was selected when they are selected. Because in the dungeons, the Africans were not taking their blood. They will use this water to wash their hands before they send them to where the governor lived. Some of the females were being very difficult allowing themselves because it wasn't their will. So whenever the governor chooses any of them, they refuse. When you look over there, that's a cannonball. It weighs about 28 kilograms. They will chain their ankles to the cannonball for them to stay in the sun. That was done to put here. The other females, so that whenever they are being selected, they won't refuse, but allow themselves to the government. So before we see the dungeons, let's have a look at them.
First time I see one cup.
So the water is all over this place, and it's about 9 feet. Let's come this way. This African women were kept in this dungeon. They were not allowed to move out, so they kept containers in all the dungeons in the castle. Whenever they want to eat themselves, urinate, defecate, or do anything, they will do everything in the containers. When the containers are full, the only option the enslaved Africans had was to do everything on the floor. We all know females menstruate every month. Even during that time, they were still not allowed to move out and were doing everything in the dungeons where they fed them. And the food the enslaved Africans ate wasn't given to them for them to be satisfied, but just given to them for them to stay alive, so that they can send them to the New World to work in the land that was fertile and good for plantation. When you look on the floor, these are sedimentary rocks. These are some of the rocks they used to build the castle. They've done renovations here. That's why we see the floor like this aspect. This place was more abstract or rougher than how it looks now. And the Africans will stay in the dungeons for about 2 to 3 months before the ships will send them to the New World. So you're talking about distortions of bodies because of how they spent much time here. 2 to 3 months, most of their bodies will be distorted. Trauma and also being in the dungeons for a very long period of time can also affect the sense as well. The hole over there leads to the magazine where they kept all the ammunition, guns, gunpowders, and other things. So whenever there is leakage at the magazine, the chemicals there sometimes come straight to the dungeons, and that's killed some of the enslaved Africans because they didn't continue. So in the dungeons, some of the Africans died before they sent the survived ones to the New World. 600 million men and 400 million women, there will be about 1,000 at a season. But because of the conditions in the dungeon, sending them to the New World, about 10% of them will die before they will send the survivors to the New World. And in the ships, the condition even became worse than the condition in the dungeons. At the next dungeon, I'm talking about the condition in the ships when the enslaved Africans were brought to the New World. But now, the females who were being raped, what even happened to them when they get pregnant? Let's find out about that at the secret passage to the government. Please. So this is the secret passage to the governor's bedroom. All the females who were selected by the governor were forcibly led by the soldiers to climb these steps to where they lived, although they were in the dungeons. But because they wanted to satisfy themselves, they forced the women to climb these steps to where they lived. It wasn't only the governor who was raping the women, the soldiers were doing the same thing. And whenever the females get pregnant by the governor or the soldiers, they will send them to the Elmina town. In this community, the Europeans built a lot of stone houses. So when they send them there and they give birth, they will stay there for about 7 to 8 years. The reason was for the children to learn the local language before they will bring the children back again for formal education. For some of them to become missionaries, interpreters, and also soldiers, but the mothers won't have any contact with their children again. Some of the females were brought back again to the castle to do all the domestic work because they didn't bring their wife, the soldiers were doing everything. But when they bring them back to the castle to work, they will still not be allowed to have any contact with their children. And those who were not brought back to the castle to work won't be in the dungeons again, but will be free to stay in the Elmina town just because they didn't want the children to know more about their mothers. And the children who became soldiers, because they stayed with the Europeans for quite a period of time and stayed with the mothers for just 7 to 8 years. Some of them were being brainwashed and even treating the Africans in the dungeons the same way the Europeans were treating them. When you come to Elmina, as first you see a lot of mixed race in this town. You'll be hearing some European names like Van Dyke, Ferguson, Bilson, Anderson, and so on. All these names are some of the influence of the Europeans when they arrived here. So you're going to have a look at the governor's bedroom, but we can't use the steps. It's very weak now. After we see the dungeons in the room of no return, we use the different routes to where the governor stayed. Now let's have a look at the journey from where some of the enslaved Africans were captured to Elmina Castle. This way.
Van Dyke is my family name.
Wow.
Caribbean. Okay.
So this is one of the female slave dungeons, and in this dungeon about 130 women were kept. When you look on the floor, in 2015, an exhibition was held in this dungeon, and about 40 people slept here for a day. The exhibition was done to pay homage to the ancestors, for them to feel how the ancestors felt during the time of the slave trade. So they used this clothes to cover themselves in 2015. The next day when the door was opened, the dancing was smelling very bad because some of them related during the business. Some fell sick due to the condition that they were in here just for a day. So let's imagine the time the enslaved Africans would be here for about 2 to 3 months before they will be sent to the new world. What will be happening to them during that time? Someone may ask the reason why people from different West African countries also joined for the exhibition. During that time, some of the people were captured and brought from different West African countries as well. When they were coming here, they had routes that they used, where they mostly used the northern part of Ghana. Walk barefooted from the northern region to a place in the northern region called Salaga. In Salaga, there's a slave market called the Salaga Slave Market. They will trade over there before they walk barefooted from Salaga to a place in the central region called Assin Manso. When they get to Assin Manso, there is a river called the Assin River. They will wash the body of the enslaved Africans there. That will be their last part before they walk barefooted from Assin Manso to Elmina and keep them in the dungeons for about 2 to 3 months before they will be sent to the new world. Coming from the northern region to Assin Manso will be about 15 hours drive. And coming from Assin Manso to Elmina will be about 1 hour, 30 minutes or 2 hours drive. So you know, it will be about 20 or let's say 17 hours drive from the northern part of Ghana to Elmina. But the enslaved Africans walked barefooted from there to this place. So some of them died to the condition that they were in. When you look at these bricks, the yellow bricks belong to the Dutch, and the red ones on the floor also belong to the Portuguese. When the Portuguese were building this castle, they used sedimentary rocks, but the bricks were supposed to build in it. When the Dutch attacked the Portuguese, due to the bombarded area during the attack in 1637, the Dutch used these bricks to fix all the bombarded areas in the castle. Another reason behind these bricks was when the Europeans were coming here, they were using the bricks to balance their ships. But going back to the New World, because the bricks will be used in the castle, how they will arrange the Africans in the ships will balance it, and that killed most of them. Those who were sick in the ships, because they needed the stronger ones to work on the land, they didn't take care of them, but threw their bodies in the sea. So those who died in the ships were even more than those who died in the land. So when they got to the New World, working on the land, the condition became worse than the condition in the land. So at the room of no return, I'm going to talk more about the conditions when the enslaved Africans brought to the New World working on the land. Now let's have a look at the branding room, the intersection room where the Africans were counting, and the room of no return. Please. Africans will be counted before they will be sent to the new world. So all the female enslaved Africans who survived will use this part. We're going to go then and explain more about what happened here when we use the different routes to the intersection. Let's go this way.
Is this stairs? No. Oh, right here. You want me to this way. Come on in.
So the enslaved Africans were branded before they sent them to the new world. This is the branding group. The Africans, some of them were sent to the Caribbean and some were sent to America, North and South America. Most of the enslaved Africans who were sent to America were sent to Brazil, and they had companies that were buying the enslaved Africans. One of the companies used to be the Dutch West Indies Company. They had metals in Asia, so the metals by the people. They will put those metals in fire, some in the chest or the back of the men for easily identification. And due to the shock, some of them died. Because of that, the females were given tax on their wrist and their necks before they meet the men at the intersection room where they will be all counted and later send them to the room of return. This is one of the dungeons for the men, and about 100 men were kept in this dungeon. Because the men were aggressive fighting for their freedom, the Europeans never entered the dungeons to feed the male enslaved Africans, but threw food through holes when you look up there. This side, at my right, my left, and my right. So they will put the food through these holes. When the food drops down, they will fight for the food, and the stronger ones will probably get something to eat, but the weaker ones will never get anything to eat. The men will be here, we counted through this route to the intersection room before they send them to the room of no return. So please, let's get closer to the intersection room and the room of no return. Sweet. Okay, watch your step. You watch your step?
Yeah, watch your step.
One step. One step.
Oh, okay. The original is me.
One step.
Yeah. Weird. Yeah.
So this is where the enslaved Africans will be counted before they will send them to the room of no return. The female enslaved Africans who survived in the dungeons, when the ships arrived, they will use these parts. When the Portuguese were here, they had steps over here. That was what they were using to descend. The Dutch maintained it because the Dutch continued with the slave trade. Because the British used this castle as a sub-administration center, and when they took over this castle, the slave trade was already been abolished. Using the castle as a sub-administration center, they made a drainage here for easily flow of water. And the men who survived used where we came from. Counting the enslaved Africans here, you can see someone you know for last. It will be your wife, your husband, or your child, but they can not talk to each other. They were not allowed to communicate. Randomly, they can send the wives to the Caribbean, send the husband to America, which means they won't see each other again. And because the tribes were not speaking the same language, and they brought some of them from different West African countries, it became very difficult for them to understand each other, to even fight together for their freedom. So they'll be all counted here before they will send them to the room of no return. Let's be very careful and bend down our heads as least 3 or more steps before we raise our heads up. Please.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
I'm assuming most of this floor is compacted feces.
Okay, so everything has been cleared, but in Cape Coast, there's still.
In Cape Coast, it has the compacted feces.
Okay, watch your head.
Oh, yeah.
There are more steps. There are more steps.
All the way, all the way.
There are more steps. Before you raise your head up.
Down,
There are more steps.
down, down, down.
So this is the room of no return. The last place they brought the enslaved Africans before they took them to the new world. And this is the door of no return.
Going through here is safe.
That's it. You never come back.
On the ship.
Yes.
Yes,
When they were doing the barter trade, the exchange of goods for goods, the door was bigger than this. But when the attention shifted from the barter trade to the slave trade, they reduced the door to this size. And the reason was to count the enslaved Africans well and also control them very well. At first, the sea was very closer to the castle, but due to the rotation of the earth and the sea defense they turned over here, the sea has receded or pushed to that side. So a ship will come, but the ship is very far from the castle, and the smaller boats will come very closer to the castle. They have steps over here. That's why we're waiting to descend to the smaller boats before we will take them to where the ships were, and later send them to the new world. Going to the New World, as I said earlier, how the enslaved Africans were arranged in the ships was to balance it, and that killed most of them. Because the land was discovered new and was very fertile and good for plantation, those who were taking the ships, they never took care of them by throwing their bodies in the sea. When they got to the New World working on the land, that's when some of them got a chance to escape. Those who were escaping and were being caught by the Europeans, the punishment they gave them there was to cut some parts of their bodies and also hang some of them to put fear in the other Africans working on the land not to escape. But some of them escaped successfully, and those are the Maroons. The Maroons are the escaped enslaved Africans. The descendants can now be found in the Caribbean countries like Haiti, Suriname, Jamaica, and the others. When you look at the reed, the bottles and all the materials here, all these were brought by people who visit the castle to pay homage to their ancestors. So before we see the two separate cells, one for the Europeans and one for the Africans who fight for their freedom, let's have a look at this place. We'll take a picture. You can do it. Let's have a look or take a picture.
Look up. Yeah, I'm not going to take a picture.
Thank you, Manso.
Let me take a picture of that.
Okay, so the writings here is in Old Dutch. And this was in the memory of the last Director General from the Dutch West Indies Company. He came from Zeeland in 16th January 1758, and he died in 12 March. He spent only 3 months there. He died of malaria. When the priest died, there was a priest here called A. Anderson. He wrote this about Van Tets, that he was a kind person, truthful and respectful. So how can someone being kind be at a place where they're buying humans, and especially being the Director General from the Dutch West Indies Company, a company that was buying them? So maybe he was kind to his people, but not to the local people.
Exactly.
He's called Van Tet, and the priest who wrote this about him is called A. Anderson. These are not dungeons, but two separate cells. We have the European cell and the condemned or the African cell. Let's move inside to compare these two separate cells.
Point first.
As me from. Oh, yeah? I don't know the cockroach people. You're right.
So this is a cell for the European soldiers. Some of the soldiers were misbehaving in the castle, going out without permission and drinking too much alcohol. And some of the soldiers who were brought here were ex-convicts, some of them were prisoners in Europe. So because they believe they can die of malaria when they come here, they'll bring them here to the soldiers. Because some of them will come to Africa and spend just 2 months, 3 months, they will die of malaria. So those who were misbehaving were brought here as punishment. Looking at this place, it's a very good source of ventilation. It's hot. No one died over here because they'll provide them food and water and spend some hours here before they'll be sent back from the cell. They can spend about 20 hours or just 15 hours and they'll send them back from this cell. This was the only punishment for the European soldiers. Let's compare this to the condemned for the African cell.
There's ventilation.
So this is the condemned fell. And over here they brought the freedom fighters. Some of the enslaved Africans in the dungeons were fighting for their freedom. And because they didn't want them to convince the other Africans to start fighting for their freedom, they brought it as punishment. Whenever they are bringing the Africans to the castle, when they see some of them communicating, they believe they understand each other. So they don't keep them in the same dungeon. But even when they did that, some of them were still fighting for their freedom. When they bring them here, as you can see, there's a very bad source of ventilation. The air that came to this cell came through the European cell when you look up there. When they bring them here and they die, they don't bury them on the land, but throw the bodies in the sea. This was a punishment for the freedom fighters, and over there was a punishment for the soldiers who were misbehaving in the castle. Let's have a look at where the governor stayed and compare to where the Africans lived. The Dutch Reformed Church, where the Dutch were worshipping while the slave trade was going on, before we see the forts built by the church. Please come this way.
They're right there.
So this is the governor's bedroom, a very good source of ventilation and iron place as well. When the Portuguese were coming here, there was a governor who led them called John Diego de Assin. He led about 200 soldiers. Some of them were masons, carpenters, and missionaries. When they arrived, they came to meet a king in Elmina called Assin. He gave the Portuguese this land just because of the battle trade. He believed the battle trade was beneficial to his people. When the land was given to them, they were building a castle. They even got help from the local people when they were building this castle. All the things that we've seen are empty, where the storerooms where they could their tools and their materials. But when the attention shifted from the battle trade to the slave trade around the 16th centuries, all those rooms later turned to dungeons where they kept the Africans in. So we can say Africans even built their own dungeons. When we look over here at two living rooms for the car, this is a look. What's that here? Yes, these are two living rooms.
From the shores of Elmina to Cape coastlines, every pop tells a story, every dream takes flight.
Is there anything else in stock?
The market.
Oh, it's over there.
Let's make that one now.
I see, okay.
Are the two living rooms for the governor. So whilst they were out there enjoying themselves, the Africans were in the dungeon screaming and shouting for their freedom. Let's have a look at where the Dutch were worshipping. By descending, please be very careful with the steps. It's sometimes slippery and steep as well. Let's come this way.
Raphlink Root Tours opens every door. Hear the drums calling, feel the heartbeat strong. This is where our history has belonged. Every journey brings the past alive. In the land where our spirits thrive. We're going back to our From every nation, come and see the beauty of Ghana, proud and free. Raphlink Root Tours, lead the way, create memories every day. Discover the culture, embrace the truth. Welcome home with Raphlink Root Tours. Meet the people, hear their songs.
So this is the Dutch Reformed Church. When the Dutch used the Portuguese church as auction room place for the worship, in the writings up here it says, Zion is the temple of the Lord, and here is the Lamb on the page. So here we live anytime we are here to worship God, we are always there with them. But beneath this church, we also have one of the female slaves. Let's have a look at what's built by that. This on the screen.
Visitor truly belongs. Golden beaches, kingdoms, and smiles so bright, guiding your journey from morning to night. We can voice, let the world know. To the land where our stories grow. One people, one heart, one destination. Let's shine for every generation.
And when you look up there, that's Fort St. Jack, built by the Dutch in 1665. So this is the hill the locals showed the Dutch before the Dutch were able to attack the Portuguese. After the attack, the Dutch continued with this left field. That's people because when the Dutch took over this town, it's left field. So after the attack, they came soldiers up here to watch over the castle from earlier. So when you stand up there, you see every corner in Elmina town and some. And over here are moats. Let's come this way. Whenever they become Kakum, and fill these boats with seawater so that they can start with ourselves. When you look where they fell over completely like this and pictures here. You can do that for about 2 minutes.